There is a gentle story behind belly dancing that is easy to overlook when the lights are bright and the costumes catch every glimmer. And it begins in places that are quiet and ordinary, in rooms that are not theaters, and in gatherings that are not ticketed, where the rhythm is not a show to watch, but a pulse to share. When we trace this story slowly, we find that the ancient secret is not hidden in a vault or locked in a single date, and it is not guarded by gates or complicated codes, because the secret is simply how people once lived together, how families and neighbors marked time, and how the body learned to answer a drum before the world learned to arrange seats and build stages. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight, and that single thought said plainly and softly sets the pace for everything that follows. It is a slow pace, without urgency, without sharp edges, without the need to prove one version of history over another, because this is a history for rest, a history that whispers more than it declares, and it returns to the same small truths again and again until they feel familiar and safe. In the oldest layers of this story, movement is not trapped inside any one name, and it is not tied to a uniform, and it does not ask for applause, because it belongs to the simplest rhythms of celebration and comfort. People gather for a wedding or a birth or a seasonal milestone, and they bring the instruments they have and the voices they carry, and the dance grows from there like a calm ripple in a bowl of water. Hips sway in short arcs that fall back into place as if guided by gravity and breath. The torso draws a quiet circle that repeats so many times it stops being a circle and becomes a kind of gentle breathing. Shoulders answer a drum beat with small shivers that are not dramatic but precise. And feet shuffle or pause, not to look impressive, but to remain stable and grounded. Nick. Costumes do not come first in this story because clothing follows need, and the earliest need is comfort and freedom to move in spaces that are smaller than theaters and warmer than stages. Long dresses, wraps, and simple garments are enough, and they make sense in homes and courtyards where people already live. Ornament appears in bits and pieces depending on a family's means, a town's markets, or a festival's mood, and it is never a law but a choice, and sometimes the choice is plain and unadorned. In this gentle space, the conversation between body and rhythm is the constant thread, and it is strong enough to hold the dance together without requiring a single dazzling accessory. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight, and this phrase repeats because it is the compact center of the story, and it works like a traveler's lamp, not bright enough to wake anyone, just steady enough to show the next step. When people look back and try to locate the exact beginning, they often meet fog because community practices grow gradually, crossing town lines and household thresholds without leaving clear signatures. It is one of the reasons myths have such a long life, since a neat story is easier to pass along than a soft collection of small realities. Yet the small realities are kind, and they ask little from the listener. A grandmother marks rhythm by clapping and a niece copies. A neighbor hums a melody and someone else reaches for a drum with a skin stretched tight, and the beat arrives simple and steady. The movements answer that beat with little pulses of muscle, with hips that tilt and return, with ribs that lift and settle, and the pattern repeats enough times to become a calming fixture in the room. This gentle origin does not erase the beauty of performance later on, and it does not argue with stages or costumes, because those are also part of the story, simply not the first part. The first part is ordinary time arranged around ordinary people who have found a gentle way to exist near one another, and the dance they make is a way to listen more closely. The ancient secret is that there is no drama here, and the drama came later when people began to place the dance under brighter light for guests and travelers. Before that, and beneath that, there is a quieter floor, a steadier pulse, and a sense that the dance did not need to be looked at very hard to be real, because it was already woven into daily life. And if you imagine a house at dusk, with warmth held close to the walls and voices soft the way voices become when the day is almost over, the dance fits there easily. It can be a small shuffle in slippers, a gentle balance on the balls of the feet, a waist that draws a figure 8 so calm it might be mistaken for stillness from across the room. Nothing needs to be proven, and nothing asks to be judged. Children can move alongside elders with no rules about who counts as a performer. The drum says one thing, and the body says yes by repeating it, and the evening becomes a conversation too simple to need titles or announcements. In this place of origin, the audience does not sit away from the dancers, and there is no curtain to open or close. People are near, within arm's length, and the rhythm can be felt in the table, in the floor, in the chest. When someone becomes tired, they can sit and still be present, because the dance continues even when the feet are quiet, and it continues in the timing of a nod, or in the reflex of a shoulder that answers the beat without thinking. The oldest layer is the quietest layer. The oldest layer is also the most forgiving, because it belongs to everyone who is willing to hear it. When we call this the ancient secret, we are not hiding facts. We are honoring the parts that were not written down because they did not need to be. They lived in repetition and in memory, and they were passed along in rooms, not in books. A neighbor moves like this, and another neighbor remembers, and the repetition across months and years makes the pattern stronger than paper. Even if the names for steps changed, the way the body listened stayed the same. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight, and the spotlight, when it came, could only illuminate what was already there. Égal. The story begins there and keeps beginning there, because even after travel and tourism and theaters and films made their claims, the old layer continued to exist beneath them. If the modern world is a surface that reflects light easily, this older world is a deep well that changes less. What seemed like spectacle from the outside was, from the inside, still a conversation, and conversations do not end simply because new listeners arrive. They simply stretch to include them, and the pulse goes on. Long before anyone spoke of costumes as if they were uniforms or rules, there was clothing chosen for comfort and practicality, and the dance shaped itself around what felt natural. Long dresses and wraps sat lightly on the body so the hips could tilt and settle, so the torso could draw slow circles, so the shoulders could ripple like small waves. Nothing insisted on jingle or shine because the movement did not need sound to be understood by those who shared the room. When decoration appeared, it was guided by what was available, what could be made, and what suited the moment. A sash might be tied because it held a garment in place, and only later did anyone decide that a sash could become the focus of the eye. As people traveled more and as images moved faster than stories once did, a newer look formed on cafes and stages, and it did so because stages invite clarity. On a stage, the eyes are farther away from the hips and ribs and shoulders, and the movements must communicate across distance. Bright fabric, reflective beads, and metallic ornaments help the audience read shapes and accents, and so the costumes changed to serve this new distance. The dance did not change its heart, but the clothing changed its voice, and a belt, once simple, learned to sparkle so that the back row could see where the beat landed. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight, yet the spotlight teaches the costume to speak louder, and there is no conflict if we allow room for both truths. When a myth later says that coins were sewn to belts because dancers put their payment on their bodies, the myth is tidy and easy to repeat, and that is why it spreads. It is not unkind. It is simply too neat for a long and winding story. The gentle reality is that metal discs, bells, and coin-like ornaments were gradually added because they looked beautiful, and because they punctuated rhythm, and because they helped the eye and ear find the accents in spaces where distance and noise make subtlety fade. Decorative blanks could look like coins without carrying any payment at all. The sound they made was not proof of an ancient rule. It was proof of a stage's request for clarity and presence. The older rooms of the dance were never reorganized around payment sewn into belts, because those rooms did not depend on belts to define belonging. A wedding did not require a uniform. A family gathering did not require a costume. The dance answered a drum and a melody, and it did so with a body already sheltered by whatever the season and household allowed. When more public spaces asked for a bolder image, the image arrived, and it was lovely, and it produced the shimmer that an audience associates with the dance. Both realities can sit side by side. One is a social practice that survives by being easy to enter. The other is a stage practice that survives by being easy to see. In some places, performers in cafes and nightclubs began to polish a set of garments that balanced coverage with movement. Bra, belt, and skirt became a recognizable trio in certain settings, and the belt, when beaded or trimmed with metal, provided a frame for the hips that made accents legible. Fringes moved when the hips moved, and the eye followed the fringe to read the beat. Sequins and paillettes caught light with every small circle of the torso, and veils introduced an airy mood that matched melodies that rose and settled like breath. None of this erased the earlier rooms. It was simply an additional room built with different lighting. Because images travel faster than the stories behind them, the image of the belt with coins, and the idea that those coins were payments found each other and fused. It was easy to pass along, especially in places far from the original rooms where the dance belonged to everyday life. A student might buy a hip scarf studded with metal discs because the sound guides the hips, and a shop owner might describe it in a way that matches the buyer's sense of romance and distant lands. The buyer tells a friend, the friend repeats it, and the story turns into a kind of packaging. It is neat, and it helps sell an image, and there is no need to scold it when we can simply place it where it belongs. As a modern tale describing modern garments for modern stages and classrooms. The classroom especially has its own logic. A beginner cannot always feel whether a small motion in the hips has happened, and the sound of a jingle confirms it. The scarf becomes a mirror for the ears, not just the eyes, and the learning process steadies. The teacher can hear the accents land along the back row and can correct or encourage without stopping the music. What helps in learning today does not tell us everything about yesterday, and that is fine. It tells us what helps the body listen now, and listening is the constant thread. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight, and the classroom, like the stage and the living room, exists to help the body remember. It is natural to want one story that ties everything together, and the coin belt myth seems to offer it. But we can rest in the slower truth that many small stories braid together over time. In one household, a belt might be beaded because a relative is skilled at needlework. In another, a belt might be plain because the money for beads is needed for food. In one town, a market might sell metal discs that look like coins because a supplier found them cheaply. In another town, only ribbons are available. The dance continues in all places because the dance is the conversation, not the accessory. The oldest layer is the quietest layer. The quiet layer says that the movement speaks even when it wears nothing that catches light. As we move gently from these realities into the spaces shaped by travelers and filmmakers, we carry with us the knowledge that the outside gaze rearranged many stories. The world exhibitions and the early films presented a condensed image, something legible and dramatic in short time, because short time demands clarity. When the camera needs a symbol, it prefers a strong silhouette and a sound that can be tied to it. A belt that shimmers and makes a bright, small noise fits the camera's need. That choice belongs to the camera and the stage, not to the origin. We can appreciate it while still returning to the smaller rooms where people gathered with no cameras at all. If we walk quietly through regions that shape this dance, we find many flavors of movement that share a family resemblance, not identical, but kin. And each flavor answers music in a way that suits local habits. In Egypt, the torso often speaks in sentences made of small phrases, with hips that underline the drum and ribs that glide to stretch a melody. And the overall feeling is musical interpretation rather than acrobatics, because the dance listens first. In parts of the Levant, steps may travel a bit more lightly, feet marking small paths, while the arms hover like lines drawn in air. In Turkey, some performances introduce turns that carry the body through space, and the bounce of the rhythm invites accents that feel buoyant. In North Africa, different folk traditions maintain their own accents, their own clothes, their own tempos, and what is preserved there is precious because it shows that variety is a sign of life, not a violation of rules. The common thread is a close relationship to percussion and to simple patterns that repeat until the mind settles. Rhythms like those often called maksum or saidi or baladi can be introduced without thick vocabulary. They are simply ways to arrange strong and soft beats so that the body can predict what comes next. Prediction is soothing. When the beat says one thing and says it again, the body stops bracing against surprise, and the motion can be small and precise. Hips tilt on the strong beats and settle on the soft ones. The torso draws a loop and then repeats the loop, and then repeats it again with almost no change. And the repetition does not become boring in a loud sense. It becomes a calm surface, and the mind rests, and the listener who is drifting toward sleep is allowed to drift a little further. When music is gentle and repetitive, the dance grows patient. The teacher does not need to demand more and more complexity, because the simplest patterns already create a complete conversation. A wave in the spine can be enough to fill many measures. A figure 8 in the hips, drawn slowly, can organize time for an entire song. If a drum adds a small flourish, the shoulder answers with an equally small flourish, and nothing breaks the surface. This is how dances survive for long periods. They suit ordinary breathing, they suit ordinary rooms, and they suit the way people like to share time without spending large amounts of energy. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight, and memory works best when what it needs to remember is simple and pleasant and repeated with care. It helps to imagine the way a scarf might move when tied at the hips, not because the scarf defines the dance, but because fabric makes movement visible to the eye. In the small rooms, a scarf can be a practical wrap that keeps a garment tidy. In a classroom, the same scarf becomes a tool that shows students where the hips begin and end. In a theater, the scarf or belt becomes a line of light, where beads and sequins catch the stage lamps and transform a small hip tilt into a visible event. All three uses are connected by the same motion, and yet none of them must be wrapped in myth to be meaningful. The scarf does not need to be stitched with coins that paid for anything. It needs only to sit at the boundary where movement is clear. There is also a way that the voice becomes part of the rhythm, especially in smaller gatherings. A chorus of short phrases, not singing exactly, not talking either, can rise and fall to encourage a dancer without turning her into a performer separate from the others. Claps come in as simple punctuation. The room participates. There is no strict line between those who dance and those who watch. This is what people mean when they say the dance was not always about entertainment. It is not that entertainment is wrong. It is that entertainment is a later layer, a public arrangement built above a private practice. The private practice knows the names of the people in the room, and it knows how to make space for the shy and the bold without ranking them. Because repetition is kind to the mind, the dance becomes a place to settle the day. Even people who do not move much can rest in the rhythm, and the rhythm can be slow enough to fit the night. When the melody curls around the beat, the shoulders can match it with small sliding motions that barely disturb the air. The hips keep time politely, as if they are telling the drum, I hear you again, and I will keep answering until the song is done. The older layer is quiet. The older layer does not hurry. It does not fear being simple. It does not fear being ordinary. It trusts that ordinary things can carry a culture safely across years and borders because ordinary things are always at hand. When later stages asked for more dazzle, the dazzle arrived without canceling the earlier rooms. Travelers wrote accounts, sometimes colored by their expectations, sometimes shaped by the need to look for novelty. Films arranged scenes to suit an audience that wanted to see a landscape and a symbol compressed into a few minutes. The symbol settled on a bright belt and a decorated bra and a skirt that moved in waves. The audience learned to recognize the symbol, and recognition feels good, so the symbol stayed. The dance adapted to the recognition without giving up its core. A performer could step onto a stage wearing the symbol and still carry the older conversation inside her chest and hips and ribs. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight, and so the performer began with memory and added light, rather than beginning with light and searching for memory. The student who enters a classroom far from the dance's regional homes often meets the symbol first. A hip scarf hangs on a rack. It glints softly. It makes a small noise. The student ties it on and discovers that the sound gives feedback. The scarf answers when the movement is crisp, and the lack of sound announces that the movement was missed. This is practical and kind. It helps learning. It gives confidence. It carries the student across the first months of uncertainty. None of this proves a myth about payment sewn into garments. It proves only that small tools help people learn, and the steady beat helps them feel grounded in a new practice that is older than the tool. All the while, the older rooms quietly continue. A family sets food on a table, a drum appears, a song begins, a space is cleared on a rug, and movement begins without ceremony. No one applauds because there is nothing to close and nothing to open. The dance exists like a conversation that resumes any time two people meet. And if a belt with jingles enters that room, it does not harm anything. But it is not necessary, because the conversation existed before it and will exist after it. The oldest layer is the quietest layer, and it is patient enough to let any newer layer sit on top without feeling threatened. When we speak softly about why belly dancing was not always about entertainment, we return to the spaces that shaped it. Kitchens warm from the day's cooking, courtyards where evening air carries a little relief, rooms where elders and children share the same light. In those spaces, dance is not performed at people, it is shared with them. The line between dancer and watcher is thin, and it shifts as the song asks for more hands clapping, or the floor asks for more footsteps. The rhythm is a way to say we are here together, and the body repeats that sentence until time itself becomes gentler. If the story had only this layer, it would already be complete, because a complete life can be lived without a stage. Yet life rarely stops at a single layer. As towns opened to travelers and as cities grew, public venues emerged, and with them came a structured idea of entertainment that reframed many practices. Cafes and nightclubs asked for something that could be packaged inside an evening, and packaging requires visible signs. A set must start and end. A dancer must arrive and leave. The audience must know where to look. In this context, costuming is an efficient language. A belt draws the eye to the hips, which is where many beats live, and beads and sequins draw light to motion so the motion reads from a distance. The body learned the drum before the spotlight, but once the spotlight exists, the costume helps translate the body's conversation into a language the spotlight understands. When filmmakers arrived, their cameras needed the same clarity. The lens likes shine because shine maps movement across the frame. The dance became easier to photograph and to sell, and this selling did not mean that the earlier spaces closed. It meant only that a new door opened, and people walked through it for reasons that made sense in their time. Key. With the new door came new myths, as myths often ride along with commerce, because commerce prefers short, memorable statements. The belt with coin-like discs became a symbol with an easy story attached, and the story moved quickly around the world. It met students who wanted to feel part of something ancient, and it gave them a sentence they could repeat. Even if the sentence was not anchored in the earliest rooms, it did not need to be cruel to have power. It needed only to fit the shape of the garment and the sound it made. Over time, 1,000 repetitions of the sentence made it seem older than it was. This is the way memory sometimes works in public. Repetition mimics age. Private memory, by contrast, is carried in bodies and rooms without sentences to announce it. The private memory is older, and it keeps breathing beneath the public one. A kind way to navigate both is to let each serve its purpose. When a beginner ties a hip scarf and hears the jingle, the scarf is teaching. When a performer steps under stage lights and wears a decorated belt, the belt is communicating. When a family gathers and no one needs a belt, the absence is not a lack, but a return to the empty hand and the quiet floor. The same person might live in all three spaces across a lifetime, and no explanation is required to reconcile them. The dance persists because it is flexible where it needs to be, and stubborn only in the places that matter. What matters is the conversation between body and rhythm. The way the hips answer the drum and the ribs answer the melody. The way repetition steadies the breath. The oldest layer is the quietest layer, and it is content to let the newer layers shimmer as long as the conversation remains intact. It can be restful to picture materials and how they behave when they move. Sequins are light and catch small bits of light like dew. Beads are heavier and produce a clearer line that pulls the eye downward when the hips tilt. Metal discs, whether they are real coins or decorative blanks, swing and click in a way that marks time, and the click can be tuned by how many discs are attached and how close together they hang. Fringe becomes a field of lines vibrating over a curve, making it easy to see where a hip begins and where it resolves. All of this is functional as theater, and all of it is detachable from the heart of the practice. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight, and so the dance exists not because of materials but through them, as water exists not because of the cup but by using the cup to take a shape. When people who love history compare notes, they often agree on a few calming points. There is no single birthplace that can be circled on a map and claimed exclusively. There is no uniform costume that predates the social gatherings that gave the dance its life. There is, however, a long continuity of people marking time together with movement, and a later continuity of people arranging that movement for audiences beyond the room. The first continuity belongs to community. The second belongs to entertainment. Each has its tasks. The community needs the dance to be open, forgiving, and at hand. The entertainment needs the dance to be legible, striking, and contained inside a program. The dance is able to be both by making its core simple, a repetition of accents and curves that anyone can learn with patience. Nutzer. This is why the dance is a good companion for rest. The same patterns that calm a learner and reassure a room also calm a listener. It is easy to imagine the hips drawing that slow figure 8 again and again, not to impress anyone, but to trace a comfortable path in the mind. It is easy to hear the drum saying the same polite sentence and the body answering in the same polite rhythm. It is easy to see how a scarf could mark the beats and how a belt could make the beats visible. And it is just as easy to put them aside and keep moving without them. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight, and the drum is always nearby because it can be made from simple things: a table, a palm, a heart. In this gentle framework, we can let go of the urge to fix a single origin story. We can allow many small origins to feed a broad stream. The stream moves through households and cities, and it accepts additions and leaves some things on the bank. The coin belt myth is a branch that joined later because it looked beautiful and sounded charming. It shaded a part of the stream for a while, and people enjoyed that shade. But the stream did not begin at that branch. It began where people marked time together, and it will continue as long as people find comfort in steady movement and shared rhythm. The oldest layer is the quietest layer, and, like cool water, it flows even when no one is watching. When people began to travel more easily, and when cities leaned toward nightlife with lights and music and rooms built for audiences, the dance found itself invited into new spaces where clarity was cherished and where distance had to be bridged. A small motion that spoke perfectly in a kitchen needed help to speak across a smoky room. The help arrived in fabric that caught light, in trims that moved like tiny mirrors, and in ornaments that clicked softly in time with the hips. Cafes taught the dance to walk on a line between intimacy and spectacle, close enough to keep the conversation with the drum, bright enough to let the back tables see it. Films did something similar with their own rules. A lens loves patterns that sparkle and lines that repeat, because repetition reads as rhythm even to eyes that do not know the beat. A veil turning in air tells the viewer where the melody arcs. A belt shimmering at the hip tells the viewer where the drum lands. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight, but once the spotlight shines, it wants a translator, and costume became that translator without erasing the original language. As the dance moved outward, many people met it for the first time as a picture rather than as a shared habit. Pictures compress stories. A single frame asks a whole practice to wear a single look, and over time, audiences came to associate the dance with the bright trio of bra, belt, and skirt, with fringes that followed each accent like punctuation marks, and with coin-like discs that ticked against one another. The discs were not there because money needed storing on a body. They were there because sound and shine help a faraway listener feel close. A stage is a kind of faraway, and a camera is a kind of faraway, even when they sit near the dancer. Distance is not only about space, it is also about context. A stranger's eye needs cues that a neighbor's eye does not. The belt obliged, the scarf obliged, the dance obliged, because it is generous in the ways that matter least and steadfast in the ways that matter most. With export came a new home, the classroom. The classroom is neither private nor public, neither family nor theater. It is a bridge. A student arrives curious and a little unsure about where the hips hinge and where the ribs begin, and the teacher ties a scarf around the student's waist and asks her to listen not only with her eyes but with her ears. The jingle of metal trims answers yes when the hip settles cleanly, and it whispers not yet when the accent fades. This is gentle and practical. The student learns to hear herself. She discovers that a simple figure 8 can be as steady as a lullaby if she draws it slowly enough to notice each edge. She learns that the torso can circle with almost no movement in the feet, and that the circle can be so small it looks like calm. The classroom borrows the stage's trims not to create spectacle, but to teach sensation, and the trims, happy to be useful, do not complain. In this middle world of cafes, films, and classes, myths multiplied because myths are light and travel well. A newcomer would ask where the coins came from, and someone would say, perhaps with a smile, that dancers sewed their pay onto their belts so they would not lose it. And the story, tidy and portable, would step from mouth to mouth like a tune. It is not a wicked story. It is simply an easy one. And easy stories are helpful when someone needs a quick answer before a lesson begins or before a curtain rises. The longer answer would require us to return to kitchens and courtyards and small rooms where families move together without needing metal to announce each beat. The longer answer would say that dance first, costume later, and that the oldest layer is the quietest layer. But long answers do not always fit into the spaces that commerce makes. So the myth stood near the door, greeting new arrivals, and the older truth rested by the hearth, just as warm as ever. The kindness of the dance is that it allows all these layers to coexist. A performer under lights can carry the quiet room inside her chest. Her breath can still sync with the steady drum. Her ribs can still write out the melody with patient lines, even while sequins collect moonlight and coins make a silver murmur. A teacher can use a belt's soft clatter to guide a class without claiming that clatter is ancient proof of anything. A family can celebrate without any belt at all and still be closer to the source than any museum label could ever be. None of these choices cancels the others. They sit around the same table and pass one bowl around. Rhythm. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight, and the spotlight, in its better moments, remembers to dim itself enough for the drum to be heard. As the dance settled into new countries, people translated it into their daily rhythms. Some kept the music slow and the motion smaller because the aim was relaxation after work. Some leaned into performance because the aim was to share culture on a stage. Some found a path through exercise and wellness, focusing on core strength and flexibility, while still tracing the same patient circles and figure eights that grandmothers traced without needing any terms of art. The translation is faithful when it respects the core conversation. The translation goes astray only when it mistakes clothing for content. But even then, the dance has a way of finding its balance again. Because if a beginner begins with costume, her body will still be taught by the beat, and the beat will bring her back home. That is the quiet secret that travels with the dance. The beat knows the way, and the body listens. The more the dance is seen, the more often it is asked to explain itself, and gentle explanations work best. A calm voice can say that entertainment is a useful frame for many things, but not a birth certificate. Entertainment arranges time into segments and adds labels. Community dissolves labels and lets time move like water. The dance can live in both vessels. It can fill a set with clear openings and closings, and it can also spill softly into an evening with no edges. It can answer applause, and it can answer a child's hand clapping off to the side of a rug. It has room for brightness and for plainness. It knows that the oldest layer is the quietest layer, and so it never panics when asked to wear glitter. It simply wears it like dew that will dry by morning, leaving the leaf as it was. Chan. Because costumes became a language that audiences learned to read, it is soothing to spend a while with the materials themselves, as if we were in a calm workshop with fabric spread out on a table and tools arranged neatly beside it. Sequins look like small, patient moons. When they are stitched in rows, they create a field that ripples even when the movement is small. Beads are like tiny anchors. Glass beads catch light and pull it downward along a line, and seed beads can outline shapes without adding weight. Fringe is a garden of lines that wake at the slightest breeze, and when a hip tips, the entire garden leans and sways, showing the motion more clearly than skin alone could do under lights. Metal discs, whether they are true coins or blanks made only to decorate, hang in layered chains or in clusters that knock lightly against one another when the dancer walks. The sound is silver and thin, like rain on a tin roof far away. It is easy to see why an audience loves it. It is even easier to see why a student loves it, because the sound reveals which part of the body spoke. Belts themselves come in many tempers. Some are wide and sturdy, wrapped in velvet that grips the fabric beneath. Some are cords that tie simply with tassels resting at the hip. Some are two-part bands that fasten at the side so the center front remains clean, letting the eye read the pelvis without interruption. Makers often build belts in layers, a base that carries weight, an interlining that holds shape, and a top layer that carries decoration. The stitching can be hidden or proud. In places where beads are plentiful, a belt might glitter like a soft shore at noon. In places where beads are rare, embroidery can take their place, and thread alone can write a pattern that becomes musical under movement. The dance is polite about these differences. It does not ask for luxury to say yes. It says yes to whatever is present and useful. And the coin-like ornaments are comforting to describe because they are simple machines. A disc with a small hole at the edge hangs from a jump ring. A row of such discs along a chain will make a whisper when the chain lifts and falls. A cluster will make a brighter click when the discs tap each other. The click tells a watcher where a sharp accent landed. The click tells a dancer that the accent was clean. In a quiet room, the click is almost nothing. In a crowded room, it cuts through a wash of sound. That is why entertainers chose it. That is why shopkeepers promoted it. At no point did the disc demand to be paid with wages in order to join the garment. It asked only to be used in a place where its small voice would be helpful. Care is part of the story too, and caring for these materials is its own peaceful ritual. A belt stored flat will keep its shape. A scarf hung on a hook will let its fringe relax. Beads like gentle hands. Sequins dislike heat. Metal prefers to be kept dry. A dancer learns to check the jump rings and the threads the way someone checks the quiet household tools that make a day go smoothly. This care is not glamorous, which makes it fit perfectly with the older layer of the practice. The oldest layer is the quietest layer, and it includes not only moving but also maintaining, not only shining but also folding and mending and preparing. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight, and the hands remember the needle before the show. In classrooms around the world, the same materials serve as guides. A teacher might loan a hip scarf to a newcomer and say, "Tie it where you feel your pelvis," and then ask her to draw a slow figure 8 while listening. The scarf writes on the air. The discs make a line of sound. The newcomer finds the edges of her movement not by looking in a mirror, but by hearing her own hips answer the drum. This discovery is small and personal and quiet. And yet it is also the gateway to a lineage that stretches back through families and rooms and gatherings where no scarves were needed. Tools are kind when they point beyond themselves. The best ones become transparent once they have done their work. All these materials also reveal how myths thrive. Because a belt is beautiful, we want a beautiful story to follow it home. Because coins look like money, we want money to be the reason they are there. Because the sound is charming, we want a charming origin that keeps the circle tidy. But history often prefers soft edges and long, slow changes that do not fit under a single sentence. The truer, slower story says the dance grew in ordinary rooms without needing metal at all. The stage later asked for shine, shops provided it, and the classroom borrowed it for learning. This long arc does not undo the pleasure of the click. It simply places it in time in a way that lets us enjoy it without insisting that it carry a proof it never promised to carry. There is sweetness, too, in watching how makers improvise when materials shift. If metal is scarce, shells can be stitched along a hem and make a dry, gentle rattle that marks steps. If thread is scarce, narrow ribbons can be braided and tied to flutter when the hips move. If beads are too heavy for a garment, embroidery with reflective thread can span the gap, drawing light without pulling the fabric down. The dance welcomes all of these because the dance is not a catalog but a conversation. The belt, the scarf, the veil, the fringe, each is a way to make the conversation visible or audible, not the conversation itself. When we imagine a stage at rest, with lights dimmed and costumes waiting, we can feel how quiet the materials are when no one is moving. They do not ask to be true or false. They do not argue. They simply wait to serve the rhythm. The moment the drum speaks, they wake and become what the room needs. Shine for the eye, click for the ear, a readable edge for the line of the hip. Then, when the song ends, they fall still as if they are listening back. This humility is the same humility that lives in the older rooms without any stage at all. It is the humility of things that exist to support breath and time, not to interrupt them. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight, and the costume remembers the body before the audience. Hoens. After spending time with materials and stages and classrooms, it is restful to gather what many careful watchers and dancers tend to agree on, speaking in plain sentences that do not hurry. The dance is older than the costumes that represent it on stages. The social, everyday layer came first, and it grew in homes and gatherings where movement was shared rather than displayed. The transition to entertainment added light and structure and a bright vocabulary of garments, and those additions helped the dance travel to people who might never have entered the homes where it began. The coin belt is best understood as part of that bright vocabulary, a later adornment that makes rhythm visible and audible in rooms where distance and noise would otherwise dissolve small motions. It is beloved because it is useful and charming. It is not an ancient ledger stitched across the waist. Histories differ on details because memories differ and records are partial. But this does not need to be a source of worry. A gentle approach accepts that families and towns hold their own versions of events, and that the lack of a single birthplace or a single garment rule does not weaken the story. It keeps it alive. A dance that belongs to many households is a dance that will keep finding its way back after fashions change. When people ask for proof of a myth, the calm answer can be that proof is thin, that no continuous record shows wages traveled from hands to belts as decoration, and that what does exist in abundance is the evidence of later performance needs and later design choices. This answer is not a scolding. It is a lantern that lights the path back to the older rooms. Why then do myths stay? They stay because they work as invitations. A quick sentence is a door someone can walk through without preparation. Once inside, if they stay, they can meet the longer story, the one with ordinary furniture and everyday music, the one where a grandmother's hands clap time and where a child's shoulder learns to shiver on the upbeat. In this sense, a myth can be forgiven for standing at the threshold if it steps aside once the guest has entered. Trouble begins only when the myth insists on being the whole house. Soft, steady teaching prevents that, because it shows the rooms one by one. Dance first, costume later, rhythm first, shine later, conversation first, show later. The oldest layer is the quietest layer. Teachers play a tender role in this slow correction. They know that many students arrive through a bright gate, charmed by a picture, And they know that charm is not the enemy. They let the picture be a beginning, and then, with patience, they lengthen the breadth of the lesson. They bring in songs that move at walking speed. They ask for movements that can be repeated a dozen times without strain. They suggest that the scarf is a helper, not a heritage claim. They invite students to close their eyes and feel whether the hip settled fully, whether the rib cage finished its small circle, whether the breath matched the beat. In such classes, history is not a set of dates, but a set of sensations carried forward. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight. A good class helps the body remember on purpose. Eins. Performers, too, carry this understanding into their work. Under lights, they may wear the bright belt with coins or discs and enjoy the way the sound marks accents for the room. But their choices inside the movement still honor quiet. They do not fill every measure with fireworks. They let repetition do its soothing task. They let a single figure 8 last long enough to become a field where the audience can rest. They let the melody's long notes travel through the ribs like wind through a curtain. They trust that a steady hip drop repeated with care can say more than a handful of fast tricks. This restraint is not austerity. It is hospitality. It welcomes the audience into the older layer without forcing them to name it. For listeners who are drifting towards sleep, these agreements are especially kind. It is calming to know that behind the shine there is a stable floor made of simple movements and steady beats. It is calming to imagine that in any city, in any decade, a person could set down a bowl, clear a small space, and begin to move with the same small arcs and the same small circles, and that somewhere else a quiet drum would find them. It is calming to hear again that the coin belt story is bright and recent, that the older story is plainer and softer, and that both can exist without argument as long as we remember which one came first. Repetition turns these ideas into a familiar room for the mind to sit in. The oldest layer is the quietest layer. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight. Not a show to watch, a rhythm to share. It also helps to remember that history in motion resists fences. As the dance traveled, it met new instruments, new tempos, new rooms, and it learned to speak in many accents without losing its voice. Some places favored quicker steps, some favored grounded hips, some favored wider turns, some favored almost none at all. The differences are not threats, they are proofs of life. When someone asks which version is correct, the tidy answer is tempting but unhelpful. The kinder answer is that correctness in this practice often means faithfulness to conversation. Does the movement honor the beat and the breath? Does it keep the hips and ribs speaking clearly? Does it allow repetition to do its work? If so, it is close to the heart, whether it wears coins or not, whether it wears sequins or none. So the gentle consensus, spread across studios, family rooms, and stages, is made of these soft points. The dance is old, the stage is newer, the bright belt is newer still. The myth is memorable but not necessary. The core is ordinary and shared. Anyone who listens long enough can find it. You do not need a special room to begin. A small square of floor is enough. You do not need a special garment to begin. The breath you already have is enough. You do not need a special story to begin. The drum's simple sentence is enough. And when the lesson is over and the belt is untied and folded, what remains is also enough. A body that remembers how to answer rhythm without hurrying. The ancient secret is simpler than a legend can hold, and it stays simple even when we say it again in different words. The dance began in ordinary rooms where people already knew each other, and it moved slowly through days that were already full. It was not always about entertainment because it did not need an audience to prove that it existed. It needed only a rhythm that arrived like a friendly knock at the door and a body that answered without hurry. Long before a belt learned to sparkle, and long before cameras learned to frame a silhouette, the hips traced patient lines and the ribs drew quiet circles. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight, and that memory is older than any costume, older than any stage, older than any story told to make sense of shine. If we let the mind walk back across the path we have taken, the landmarks are gentle and easy to recognize. There is a kitchen with steam still in the air and low voices keeping each other company. There is a courtyard with evening light resting on the walls. There is a living room where a rug has been moved a little to make space. People clap in time the way people have always clapped in time. A small drum repeats a short sentence. Hips tilt and return. Shoulders answer with tiny shivers that never become sharp. Nothing demands a costume to be true. There might be a scarf tied at the waist because it is practical, and it might be plain or it might be pretty, but either way, it is not a rule. Dance first, costume later. The oldest layer is the quietest layer. Then the path runs forward toward cafes and films and stages, and the same movement agrees to speak a little louder, not because loudness is better, but because distance asks for it. Belts become frames the eye can read. Fringe becomes a field that shows a small motion clearly. Sequins and beads and metal discs find their place in the light. The coin belt story grows because it is tidy, because it is easy to remember, because it seems to match the look of the garment. But the truer, slower story sits just beside it and keeps breathing. The discs are decorations, sometimes coins, and often coin-like blanks, chosen because they catch light and make a sound that helps a faraway listener feel near. The dance remains a conversation with rhythm, whether the belt speaks or rests. Not a show to watch, a rhythm to share. The path also passes through classrooms, which are bridges between the quiet room and the bright stage. In those rooms, a scarf helps beginners hear what their hips are doing. The faint jingle becomes a mirror for the ears. A teacher asks for a slow figure 8, and the scarf answers yes when the shape is clear. Students learn to feel where the pelvis begins and where the rib cage ends, and they learn it with patience, not with hurry. A tool can be new and still be kind. It can be recent and still be useful. Tools point toward a practice without needing to be the practice itself. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight. A good class helps the body remember on purpose. Makers and materials take their place in the story with the same steady grace. Sequins scatter light like dew. Beads draw lines that help the eye follow motion. Metal discs, whether ancient or newly stamped, create a small silver sound that marks accents without shouting. A belt is built with layers that support weight and shape, or else it is a simple tie with tassels that fan out when the hips move. Care is part of the rhythm too. Folding, mending, checking threads and rings. These tasks are quiet and unglamorous, and so they belong to the oldest layer as easily as breath belongs to a song. When the song ends, the materials rest, and in that rest they show what they have always been. Helpers, not the heart. People who love this practice often meet in the middle of these truths. They agree in soft sentences that do not need to fight. The dance is old. The stage is newer. The bright belt is newer still. Myths can be forgiven for opening the door if they step aside once we are inside. A story about coins sewn for wages is memorable and sweet to tell, but it is not a key that unlocks the first room. The first room unlocks itself when someone taps a rhythm on a table and someone else answers by moving. The proof that matters most is not written on metal. It is written in repetition that feels good to the body, in patterns that anyone can learn without special conditions, in evenings that grow calmer because a simple beat is present. It is also restful to remember that variety has always been part of this practice. The dance changes its accent as it moves through countries and languages, and yet the voice remains recognizable. Hips speaking to drum, ribs speaking to melody, shoulders adding soft punctuation. Egypt traces one set of lines, the Levant another, Turkey a third, North Africa many more, each shaped by local music and rooms and habits. None of these accents requires a coin belt to be itself. None requires a stage either. The accents are ways of saying yes to rhythm. The garments are ways of showing that yes to eyes and ears when the room is large. Because this is a history for sleep, it helps to settle the thoughts into a few calm phrases and let them return like waves that do not need counting. The ancient secret behind belly dancing is how ordinary it was and how ordinary it still can be. It was not always about entertainment because belonging does not require an audience. Dance first, costume later. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight. The oldest layer is the quietest layer. Not a show to watch, a rhythm to share. Each time these phrases repeat, the picture grows more familiar. A small space, a steady beat, a patient figure eight gliding through air as if the hips were tracing the edges of a calm lake. If an image wants to linger, let it be simple. A hand resting on a tabletop that carries the feel of the drum through wood. A scarf lying quietly on a chair after the song, fringe at peace, metal silent. A floor that knows the shape of footsteps so well it could draw them without looking. A window half open to night air. In such a room, no one needs to measure the past to feel connected to it. The connection exists in the ease of repeating motion, in the way a shoulder lifts and releases with the melody, in the way a breath arrives and departs on time. The dance is a soft agreement to keep time together, and that agreement is older than any curtain, older than any ticket, older than any rumor sewn along a hem. So the story closes where it began, with small truths that have learned to stay. People gathered. A rhythm spoke. A body answered. Later, lights learned to help, and garments learned to speak on behalf of motion when the room grew large. Stories grew around the shine because shine invites stories. Some stories were neat and new, and they did not always know they were new. The longer story remained patient and kept its place, which is to say, it kept moving in ordinary rooms. If you remember only a little, remember this little. The dance was a way to share time before it was a way to fill a stage, and it can always return to sharing time whenever it needs to. It never forgets how. And as the room in your mind becomes quiet, the phrases can fold themselves and rest. The dance is old. The stage is newer. The bright belt is newer still. The body remembers the drum before the spotlight. The oldest layer is the quietest layer. Not a show to watch, a rhythm to share. The beat that began near the door drifts inward and grows soft, not gone, only small enough to carry without effort. If the picture fades, it fades like evening, leaving the outline of a figure eight on the air, unhurried, complete, and ready to be found again whenever someone taps a gentle rhythm and someone else, without thinking, says yes.